Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Brews Bytes titled Using the CIA Promise to Protect Data, the Other CIA. Usually our Brews Bytes are video-based, but today we're going to share a paper that both organizations created, XeniT and Caringo. Our guests today are from XeniT. With that, let's go ahead and make introductions. We have some great guests, some partners of Caringo, customers of Caringo that have used our product for a very, very long time and who are experts in their space. And we'll start with your introduction, Ronny. So why don't you introduce yourself, and then Toon, you can go after Ronny.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Well, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on which time zone you live in. My name is Ronny Timmermans. I'm the co-founder and the managing director of XeniT. And we have been working with large archives and object storage for many years. That's why the relationship, of course, with the company is. So I would pass on the presentation to Toon Geens then.
Hello there, I'm Toon Geens. I'm CTO at XeniT. And I've been working with Alfresco and Caringo Swarm. So Alfresco is an enterprise content management system, and we store data in Caringo Swarm, and I've been working with that for about 12 years now, I think.
And from Caringo, we also have Ryan Meek. Ryan, you are a frequent guest, but why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself again?
Thanks, AJ. Welcome everyone. Happy to be here. I am the Principal Solutions Architect at Caringo, and I've had the pleasure of working with my friends at XeniT since the beginning, which was quite some time ago. So very, very happy to be here and have this conversation with everyone.
And again, our topic today is using the CIA promise to protect data. But before we get into that, I think we have to ask the most important question, it being Brews Bytes. What's everyone drinking? So we'll go in reverse order. We'll start with you, Ryan, then we'll go to Toon, then we'll go to Ronny. So what are you drinking, Ryan?
I am drinking coffee. It's a shade-grown coffee from the south of Mexico, igneous soil, gathered by a cooperative and brought out for roasting to Austin, Texas.
Okay. it blows away my green tea. How about you, Toon? What are you drinking?
Well, it's 6 p.m. here, so I'm having the real stuff. I have a triple caramelite here, which is a Belgian pale beer, and it's won the World Beer Awards in 2008, I think. So it's my favorite.
All right. I think Toon has you beat so far, Ryan. How about you, Ronny?
I can't beat Toon because I'm just having a Leffe, which is out of, I think, the same stable of brands of AB InBev, but it's a lighter beer. It's the blonde beer, the Leffe beer, and it's the one that I think internationally is pretty known. It's one of the expert beers. I'm sitting actually here right across the brewery of AB InBev in Leuven, so it's pretty appropriate.
All right. Yeah, that's. I think you both have me beat with my green tea, and Ryan, you're right behind. And with that, so we're talking today about the CIA promise, and of course we're not talking about the CIA agency here in the U.S. We're talking about the CIA method of protecting data. So, Ronny, can you walk guests through the definition of CIA?
Yes. Well, the three letters stand for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And they talk about three aspects. It's about information security, of course, because that's the topic of today and how object storage and object technology can help us. Confidentiality is whom can actually access information. Integrity, I guess, is about who can modify information and adjust, who can modify it, but can we trace and can we prove whether content is changed or not. And availability is about, well, making things available, making sure that when people want to access that the information and they're authorized, that they actually can access information. With that triad, of concepts. I think you cover a lot of what we want to offer in object storage and in archiving solutions.
So Toon, I mean, from a technical perspective, I mean, how does an organization start addressing threat prevention and detection?
Okay, so let me give some few quick examples how I understand this CIA thing. So for confidentiality, someone in accounting, for example, wants to send a spreadsheet with customer data to their colleague as an email attachment. It's part of their day job, and they make a mistake, and that email goes out to somewhere else, and now they lost their data actually. So the countermeasure here would be to use a central document repository to send out links to the data and not actually the data itself. More generally speaking, other protection mechanisms for confidentiality are like encrypting data in transit at rest. For example, if you lose your laptop, you have a remote wipe capability, and so on. For integrity, it's making sure the data is not tampered with. So a good example there is digital signature. So you have a PDF, an electronic document, and you can put a digital signature on it, and you can prove it's the authentic document and it's not tampered with. For availability, I think ransomware, for example, is a good example because when your data is encrypted by some ransomware malware, the users are no longer able to access the information they need at the time they want it. So it's all about the absolute protection, I think, for all of those, for those 3 points. You need to be reasonably protected on all 3 fronts. It's not only technical countermeasures you can take, it's also about the procedures you have in place.
And you mentioned, so I mean, taking a look, let's start at, we talked about procedures, but let's start at the lowest level at the storage layer. And maybe, Ryan, this is a good question for you. So you heard the definition of CIA. I think we're very familiar with that. So how does a storage layer help, and what different types of storage help? And then Ronny and Toon, once Ryan answers, maybe you can share your opinion based on your experiences.
Right. So I think those were great examples from Toon, and I would just start right away with his his ransomware example. It really helps to have a data storage system that was architected from the ground up, thinking about exactly availability, integrity, and confidentiality. So in the case of object storage and Swarm, something like ransomware is typically written to work on a traditional file system. And, object storage inherently is a challenging environment for those kinds of attacks. As far as availability goes, high availability is built into the fabric, really, of Swarm. So the same content is available from multiple servers. And then with respect to integrity, the integrity of objects is actually protected by hashes, sort of like a digital fingerprint in the metadata of objects. So the integrity of objects is protected over time from malicious changes, but also from things like bit rot or the gamma radiation, flipping a bit here and there. Really anything that would change the object from what it originally was. So integrity is very well addressed at the core of the storage system. And then confidentiality is as well in the authentication and authorization. So, rather than having these things layered on top, it really helps to start with a core that address that in the architecture from the beginning.
So do you have anything to add to that, Toon and Ronny?
Well, what I wanted to say is that I think that indeed Toon's examples are excellent, and Ryan just showed how that can be converted into technology. Of course, it's not just about the storage layer. It's not just about object storage. It goes through the whole layer, the whole layers of the solution. It includes people and processes. So you can only hold your confidentiality, integrity, and availability promise if all elements of the solution hold. There are much more layers, as you show now on the screen, Adrian. But what is important is that if you take measures at every layer in the architecture, it's much harder to break the system, because any layer would actually protect other layers against errors or maluse or whatever would be happening. So, and the storage layer and the content layer is the lowest one. So there's lots of layers on top of it that you would have to break in case of malicious usage, or that you would have to make mistakes in. Even at mistakes at the ECM layer, at the alfresco layer in our reference architecture, do not lead to loss of data, because there are protective measures at the content layer. So I think it's really important that all these layers work together and even protect themselves against malicious usage or errors or mistakes.
Toon, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, just recapping, a layered defense strategy is what you actually need on all different. In the past, companies had a let's say a hard perimeter at the firewall at the outside, and inside nothing really mattered, because inside the firewall, inside the walls, everything was safe and trusted. And I don't think that no longer holds today. So, and you have to keep that in mind when you're designing systems. You have to build up a layered defense strategy. So yeah, I completely agree with Ronny.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it's more and more people would rely on somewhat of the physical security of the office and the physical access to the network. And I mean, especially now, we're seeing with everyone working from home, we're seeing increased attention to, okay, well, you know, the authentication and authorization really all needs to work online, and it needs to work no matter where people are coming in from, right? I imagine that's top of mind in the alfresco installations and in Europe as well.
I do believe that you're right there, Ryan. We had a lot of crypto locking attacks. We have, on the positive side, privacy protection. All these things come into play, and where in the old days you protected by closing all the doors to the outside world. Today you can't do that anymore. You have to digitally transform, cooperate. Content is very important. As Toon said, you want to share links, not content. That means that you often hit all those layers to enable digital transformation. So the risks increase, obviously. And that means that the layers must become more protective and more armored against any malicious attack or usage.
So when you say each layer must become more protected, what's a reasonable amount of protection for each layer? I mean, is each layer different? So what should users be looking for out there if they're evaluating each of their different layers? Is just one form of protection on each layer enough, or do you need multiple layers of protection?
It's a combination of tactics and strategies, I think. If you go deeper down the stack, at the level of object storage, we use unique IDs, which are long encrypted keys. So if you want to break that key doesn't make sense. You already need to combine it with data from another source in the ECM layer. At the ECM layer, you protect at a semantic level who's the user, what kind of operation do they want to perform. At the object storage layer, you say, where does that request come from? Does it have a key to de-encrypt the content when it would access it? So it's just at different levels, I think, of abstraction and complexity and approach. And all these measures taken together create a very good wall of defense. And then even beyond the ECM, you have a gateway, and that's another type of protection. So you can just use many strategies.
So those layers can work together. Like for example, in Caringo Swarm, you have this integrity seal feature, which means you store a document. It computes a hash function. It computes a hash for the content, and together with the ID that points to this object in Swarm, you store the hash. And later on, when you, let's say 15 years later, you want to access the document again, and in the application layer, you get the document or the object ID together with a hash, which means you can verify it's not been altered behind the application's back. That way, the different layers can work together and fulfill the promise of this integrity, for example.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point.
Example. Yeah, that's a great example too, because much of the integrity checking of objects and of data in the data storage world is done with MD5 hashes, which, they're great and they're fast at detecting accidental corruption, but a malicious actor can actually create identical documents with the same MD5 if they're savvy, right? So it helps to also be able to incorporate hashes that are much more difficult to break, which is something our architecture does very well. So, detecting against accidental corruption is one thing, but detecting against malicious advanced corruption is another level that's provided here.
Yeah, and Toon brought up a good point about time too. From a longevity perspective, from a retention perspective, I mean, how long do organizations need to preserve the integrity of a piece of content for? I mean, what do you normally see as an average retention period for your customers?
I think it depends on the different sectors, but in the insurance sector, we have, for example, customers that need to keep documents, contracts for a life insurance 30 years after the contract has ended. So we're talking about maybe, possibly 100 years that we need to store that data, which is a really long time. And our history computing history doesn't even go back that far yet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess it's important to have infrastructure and architecture that you can continue to evolve while maintaining the integrity.
Field, you say, we support different hash types. MD5 might be broken now, so you could say I'm using the SHA-1 hash now. But let's say in 20 years that one could be broken as well. And a very nice feature of Caringo Swarm is that you can actually upgrade the hash in place and saying, I've got now this document, the SHA-1 hash is this type, I want to upgrade it to a new hash type. And you can update your pointers to kind of future-proof yourself as well.
Yeah, and I guess we spoke about the different processes and the different features, but from a containment perspective, containing the threats and mitigating exposure, we don't necessarily need to talk about the infrastructure here, but I mean, I'll throw a question out to the group. How does an organization contain threats and mitigate exposure? I think we talked about having multiple layers of protection on each layer, but are there any other ways that we haven't discussed yet for mitigating exposure?
Well, I mean, I can say on our side, and I'll pass it over to Ronny next. I mean, I can say on our side, we have customers that have done everything from air-gapped systems to restricting physical points of entry to the network to distributing keys on the access key token side that change in regular intervals. I mean, so there's just a really wide variety of entry points for that control. But Ronny, you had something else?
Well, Ryan, yes, one can apply those techniques. We haven't talked about, if you look beyond the application layer, you can do things like anomaly detection, geofencing, where is a certain visitor coming from. if you have somebody coming from a slightly suspect area at 1 o'clock in the night, it's something that you want to log and to look at. So these ways are different, are possible. But if you speak about containment, I think you speak about the phenomenon that we detect a breach or a problem, and that we try to mitigate or contain further spreading of the problem. So the first thing is to define the patterns of expected usage. If you have a deviation from that, you should be able to switch off. For instance, if you have a very intensive bulk usage of high load modification of documents that you wouldn't expect, I think those things, once you see those at the object storage layer, you can just switch off. I mean, normally they're in a VLAN, so you could even at the network level intervene. There are also ways of putting a small layer in between with a content gateway that would just stop access to it. So to me, containment, Adrian, is about once you detect that you have an issue, and you should have warning levels that are appropriate to that, is how do you stop further misuse of your content. And then if you would have just a file system to store your documents on, it's very hard to detect how it is being crawled and what's being modified and changed. While if you have a very good layer of monitoring that, you would detect and then stop, even just switch off the service to your repository.
Yeah.
You
see that it's and the question there of detection is actually non-trivial, right? So we even see sites where we have high workloads and we have DevOps dashboards that are, these huge television sets that are up on the walls that look like a knock. I mean, it's at a glance, people in the organization can see if the load on the servers is changing because they have visibility into the temperatures of the servers, to the network bandwidth patterns, and this may not have even been described in a script to send an alarm, but people walking down the hallway can see things at a glance if they're unusually utilized.
Yeah. The other thing, Adrian, you just pulled up the drawing about the logical zones as well in Swarm. And I think that's one way of containing it is making compartments of related information. So at least you protect one against the other. There are a number of measures, filters that you can apply at that level. There's the domains and zones, clusters, buckets, all the concepts in which you can compartmentalize your content. So at least you know in what zone something would go wrong.
And why is this difficult with file system-based storage? I mean, Ryan, maybe this is a question for you, but why would this be an issue on file-based storage or file system-based storage?
Well, file system-based storage is generally, you can have access to the files, but it's not inherently multi-domain. It's not inherently multi-tenant. Cloud-based storage is sort of inherently multi-domain, multi-tenant, and has real-time authentication, real-time authorization, and authentication. Now, you can have a token withdrawn or made invalid in a moment for a cloud-based object storage, whereas if you have access to a file system, you generally have access to a file system. It's not built the same way.
Yeah.
Toon, would you have something to add to that there?
Yeah, in that context, encryption might also play an important role. Caringo Swarm provides encryption out of the box, but that's the encryption at rest, which means you are protected that your hardware gets stolen, or let's say seized by the FBI. But it doesn't protect you from the access over the network, because at that point, Swarm does encrypt the hardware at the disk, but if you ask for a piece of content, it will give you the piece of content unencrypted. So and at that point, the application layer can work together. And we actually do that with the customer. when we store a document, every document that gets stored in Caringo Swarm gets a unique symmetric encryption key. It's encrypted with that unique symmetric encryption key, and that encryption key is encrypted with a master asymmetric RSA key. And we can store the pointer to the object together with the encrypted key, which means you need 3 pieces of information to actually access the document. You need the object ID, you need the encryption key, which is itself encrypted with the master key. And that way we can store encrypted content in Swarm. If you steal, for example, the Caringo Swarm, the content is encrypted, you can't access it. If you steal the database, that contains the object IDs and the encrypted symmetric keys, but it doesn't have the master key, which allows you to effectively securely store your data at rest, and you don't keep all the information together to actually be able to access it. So that's another layer of protection that is possible.
Yeah, I know we talked about a lot, and I mean, you've been using object storage for many years now. And of course, this is a storage show. What have you seen change from when you first started, I believe, in 2006, 2007 to now? So that's a question for all 3 of you. Maybe we start with Ronny.
Okay, what I think has made a huge impact is the arrival of cloud computing, the availability of almost unlimited access to resources that has created opportunities. If you talk about storage, I think AWS popularized a lot the S3 object protocol, which was kind of pioneered by Caringo and embodied by Swarm. So we see that kind of protocol has become actually the really dominant protocol, I think, to store large amounts of objects with all the services and security, etc., that goes along. And we do believe that the hybrid world has a lot of opportunities there, but the cloud S3 has popularized it and has made it a kind of a standard to store documents and to store binary objects. I think that's an amazing development that we have seen since starting our first large archive project in 2008.
And Toon, what have you seen change from when you first started to today? Would you agree with what Ronny said or add anything to that?
Yeah, I fully agree. And with the shift to the cloud, there is also a cloud mentality or the mentality that's needed to change to actually make things work. Because in the old days, you were optimizing to minimize the time between failures. And right now in the cloud, when some VM dies, you don't try to repair it. You start a new one, and it's up and running. In the old days, you gave your service cute little names, and they were special to you, and you try to maintain them. But the whole move to the cloud brought a mentality shift, and that mentality shift showed the qualities of the cloud, and I think those are built into Caringo Swarm from the start. So when a Swarm storage node dies, you don't really care. You get a new one, and it will automatically rebalance and rebuild itself, and there are self-healing capabilities in there, which is, it requires a different mentality as well, and I think that's been very important for building new systems.
Yeah. How about you, Ryan? Same question.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo and go even further. I think, what Ronny brought up, the arrival of AWS and Amazon S3 really, I think it let people, it gave people permission to view data storage as something that could happen over services. And then that looking at data storage as, as a valid thing to do using first like service-oriented architectures and then sort of microservices-based approaches meant that people were just more comfortable going to a service and saying, either here's my key or here's my name, please give me my object. I mean, you have no idea how many conversations we had with people that wanted to know exactly what server the object was on. I mean, but now we don't have that conversation anymore because people understand that essentially there's a service. It's responsible for giving you your data. It manages data on the back end, and it does that having many servers collaborate. Now that in itself is a huge change going forward. So those conversations, and then having S3 protocol be so accepted and so implemented between applications means that not only can you skip the conversations about RAID-based systems, you can also hook into an application that already, perhaps is integrated before you arrived. So in the XeniT case, we worked together to write to the Swarm SCSP, which is the Swarm API. But these days, it's more common to say have a media asset manager, and you can point, using S3, and you're up and running in hours instead of, well, actually that may be a bad example because the XeniT integration, I remember you guys were very fast, so you integrated extremely quickly. But there were other people that took much longer to integrate before we had an object protocol standard. So yeah, I would say having an object protocol standard and having people's mindset be very accepting of data services has been the biggest change.
Yeah, I know we've thrown a lot out at our viewers, but from a CIA protection perspective, what should organizations expect from an overall effort commitment? Like how many resources should they be committing to protecting their data? Like what percentage of their company's time should be focused on it? I know it's variable, but what have you seen out there, Ronny and Toon?
Well, if I look at the effort that they pull in, is first of all, when you make a proper design of the solution with your enterprise content services, design security is part of it. It's access rights. You don't have enterprise content management without access rights. So that's the highest level of confidentiality protection that we add. You have to do a little bit of thinking because people need to understand what life points are, what mutable, immutable, deletable or not objects are, and the combinations that you have. That requires time, but actually in a few days you design that and you start and you set it up to do its work. And what we also see, Adrian, with customers is that they start digging into what the object storage technology brings, and they come up with ideas and variations to solve problems that, of course, over time come up, or challenges, and that they detect more possibilities. But I don't think that as long as we can clearly explain, because Swarm does a lot of things, but basically there is some simple way to look at it in life points. Is it requires a week or a few weeks of good thorough thinking, studying, setting your policies, and then you're off. What is a more difficult discussion, but that goes beyond the CIA promise of content storage, is the whole retention management and records management policy at a company. That's actually an ongoing process in most cases, but Swarm and object storage can support that. So I don't think it requires such a big effort. Actually, you buy those qualities by having object storage at the lowest level in your ECM stack.
And that's so you mentioned you buy it. I mean, how do organizations get started, or where should they get started with evaluating CIA, with defining Maybe we'll start with you, Toon, and then we'll go to you, Ryan, and then we'll end up with you, Ronny. But I mean, how do organizations get started?
So I think maybe look first at what kind of organizations you actually are, because if you're storing medical records, confidentiality might be your top priority. When you're a financial institution, integrity might be your top priority. And I think for e-commerce, they could do with a little less confidentiality and integrity as long as it's available to sell stuff. So how you get started with this is you set your priorities and you realize it's not about absolute protection, but reasonable protection. Availability, I think Caringo Swarm gives you that straight out of the box. You don't have to do anything for that. For the confidentiality and integrity, you might be needing to add encryption at the application layer, for example, or it really depends on the use case.
Yeah. And Ronny, and
so starting with customers and having them describe their use case to you, is really the place that starts. I mean, I would say sometimes it's led by medical, it's led by HIPAA, financial services, Dodd-Frank. If you're in a government situation, that puts a different set of circumstances on you. But in my experience, that always starts with tell us your requirements, and we work with and advise customers on setting these up. They're often not experts themselves. Now, if they have a security group that are experts, that's great. But I would say most customers that we've worked with, we have actually advised them along the way quite a bit.
Yeah. Ronny, do you have anything to add?
No, what I want to say is, because you have to have the base configuration of your object layer, which boils down to your live points, you have a number of concrete questions to ask. So you kick off the discussion at the level at the abstraction of your content layer. So you have to determine a number of those parameters, and that kicks off a discussion. I think that's a good discussion. And you can decide to have good choices at some point. You have to think about it, because some of them are less easy to reverse than others. But then you have what you need, and you don't have to implement the qualities. You have to configure your object storage to do what you really want. And that's then sometimes the challenge, is to know what you want, and that's an evolving insight.
Yeah, and of course, we're just scratching the surface with this topic, and I just want to let our viewers know that if you do view this webinar, we're going to go ahead and send you a copy of this paper that we've created with XeniT that goes into these concepts that we've talked about, that our guests have talked about in more detail. And of course, as I think everyone can agree on, is everything's going to be custom to their own use case. That they're really going to need to take a look at their existing infrastructure, their existing processes, and then determine how to best protect those assets. And with that, here's the closing question, the question we always close Brews and Bytes with for every guest. We always like to ask if there are words of encouragement or words of wisdom that our experts want to share with our viewers on this particular topic. So with that, maybe Ryan, we'll start with you. Then we'll go to Toon, and then end up with Ronny. So Ryan, any words of encouragement from a CIA or data protection perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this may go back to previous webinars we've done, but I think starting with a beginner's mind, even though you may be familiar with these areas, it's really useful to go back and spend some time updating yourself, reviewing the concepts, reviewing what's happened in authentication, authorization, object storage, ECM, alfresco, and feeling free to develop a point of view, and then test that point of view with the subject matter experts that you have available to work with. So, I would just say, as encouragement, it's all doable. It's all available, and we are used to working with people to meet their requirements and have safe, performant installations.
Yeah. And Toon, what are your words of encouragement or words of wisdom for the viewers out there?
Well, keep in mind it's not about absolute safety, because that's a bit of a fairy tale. It doesn't exist. It's about reasonably protecting you from the threats that are out there and the risk you're taking. Have a layered decent strategy, and you have to build it out over time incrementally, because you won't have it from day one. And yeah, the context what you're in will change over time as well. So you need to be able to evolve your architecture and your strategy as well.
And Ronny, well, we'll end up with you with your words of wisdom or words of encouragement.
I will be very short. I understand from Ryan is rethink the basics. I think that's really healthy. I've understood from Toon as well, start small and make it evolve. And I would just like to conclude with 2 words: is store safe.
Store safe. Yes, very good words of wisdom and encouragement, I would say. And with that, again, a reminder, we'll go ahead and post this paper right below the webinar. We'll also follow up and send this paper to you via email when you view the webcast. As always, I'd like to thank our guests. Thank you so much for your time. And I would also like to thank our viewers. And with that, I guess I'd just like to say have a good rest of the day, Ryan, and to Toon and Ronny, have a good evening.
Thanks much, AJ.
And
thanks everyone out there.
And that concludes our webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you. Bye.